Today we're lucky to have one of our own, Tim Buchholz. You've heard Tim in the past. When he was first here, he did some wonderful jazz music for us. Last year he taught a class for us, and you all fell in love with him. And we are still all in love with Tim Buchholz. Today he's going to talk to us about music and maps, a perspective through the eyes of a jazz musician, which we know about, and an adventure racer, which you might not know about unless you read the article in the City Pages about a year or so ago, where he and his wife Anna were featured. Making music and reading a map have something great in common. They both require us to multitask while using many different areas of our brains, more than any other activity you can do. Dr. Tim Buchholz will share his perspective on how map reading in the sport of adventure racing has many commonalities to what jazz musicians do when they improvise. We give to you our assistant professor of music at UWMC and a nationally recognized jazz singer, educator, and arranger who you can follow with his jazz ensembles on YouTube. I did over Christmas and had him in my living room because my one son gave me a Chromecast so I could take my tablet, have it up on my TV, and have Tim in my living room. Now, you get to have Tim right here in our large living room, Tim Buchholz.
Good morning. Great to be here with you again for a third year in a row this morning. This has been an exciting thing for me to prepare over the last few weeks. Vicki gave a great introduction for that again. Thanks, Vicki. Let me start by giving you a little background about how this became of interest to me and how this idea started. I read two very interesting and very diverse research studies. One was on fMRI, functional MRI scans of the human brain while a jazz musician was improvising music. And we'll talk a little bit about that study, and I'll fill you in on that. The other study was similar, but reading the brain with functional MRIs, meaning it shows where brain activity is happening and how much of it is happening while someone is reading a map and looking at people's brains who regularly navigate. And these two, well, I'll explain a little bit why these were of interest to me. So first, let me tell you a little bit about what they did when they looked at the human brain during improvisation. Now, many of you may already know and have heard that playing an instrument or making music is one of the best things you can do for your brain. It activates so many different areas of our brain, and it's one of the things that you can do to actually increase your IQ and increase your abilities in many other areas by playing an instrument. Researcher Charles Lim, back in 2003, started doing research on, well, if music is so good, what's actually happening when you improvise? Now, there are some difficulties in figuring that out because you have to have a control and you have to be able to watch someone's brain as they're improvising. And of course, it was a hard thing for him to figure out. So the first obstacle, of course, for him was to figure out how can we get jazz musicians inside of an MRI machine? We can't put them all in there at the same time, right? So what they devised, of course, if you're familiar with MRIs, you can't have any metal in there, right? You can't have anything that would be magnetic. So they had to first make a keyboard, that task in and of itself, to devise this instrument, an electronic instrument, because you can't put a piano in there, of course, right? So they devised this electronic keyboard and a system of mirrors so that as a jazz pianist laid on his back, they would have the piano on their lap, they'd be looking up at a series of mirrors that would then reflect the keys in front of them, and they could improvise. So what they did was they took some controls, and they said, okay, well, we want you to memorize this piece of music and play it, and they looked at the brain, and it was just what all the other research had shown of what music had done while musicians were playing their instruments. And then what they did was they put on what you would call a play-along recording. This is something that is very common in jazz education. It's a recording of like a rhythm section, playing the rhythm and the chord changes to a song. It's a great way for young jazz musicians to practice without having other musicians with them to improvise along with this recording. So they played that through headphones of the person in the MRI machine and had them improvise. And what was amazing that they found is more areas lit up of the brain, areas of creativity, sensory areas. So many areas of heightened awareness occurred, including, as the researcher noted, the performers literally taste, smell, and feel the air around them. Those areas of the brain are being activated while they improvise. It's a really cool thing, and they found that this was more lit up than during any other activity that they've seen in that MRI machine. So I'll get a little more into the implications of that later. But that was the first study that interested me. I thought, wow, it's so cool they actually figured out a way to do this. And another thing they did also was they not only had the musician improvise, they also saw what it was like when the musician did something called call and response, or trading fours, where they were actually communicating with another musician in the lab control room. They would play something and they would communicate back and forth musically, and they watched what was going on in the brain there, and it was similar to what they saw when someone was improvising. Second study compared London bus drivers to London taxi drivers. Now you might think, well, what does that have to do with reading maps and navigation? Well, if you think about this, what a bus driver does on a daily basis is drives the same route. So there's really not much thought to it, and by the time they've done this over the years, it becomes second nature. They're not thinking about where they're going. A taxi driver has to constantly be reassessing what's the fastest way to get from point A to point B. They have a mental picture in their mind of a map, basically, of what that will look like, sometimes referred to as spatial intelligence. So they examined the brains of a large group of these bus drivers and taxi drivers, and what they found was, and this is more scientific than I'm able to understand in some ways, but the anterior hippocampi of the taxi drivers' brains had actually increased in gray volume. And what that means in layman's terms is that their brain capacity actually increased, that navigation actually changed the brain and increased the capacity to learn new things by doing navigation on a regular basis. And there are some other studies of actually what your brain is doing while it's reading a map and comparing it to looking at someone's spatial intelligence, comparing what you see on paper with a printed map to how you can translate that into real-life application. So here's an example of testing your spatial intelligence. Circle there. That's an illustration of a map, and you need to put yourself in that red circle and compare it to the picture on the right and decide, of those two arrows, the arrow that's would be coming from the bottom line, going kind of directly to the right, compared to the arrow that would match up in that red circle of that line that's going slightly downward, what matches with the picture on the right? This is a type of question that you'd be asked if you were given a spatial intelligence question or test. And what you'll find is, well, do this for a second. Make sure you've got your answer in your head. Is it the? Let's see if this works here. Yeah. Is it this line here that you're standing on the road facing, or are you on this upper line facing towards this intersection, or neither? The answer is you are on this bottom line. How many of you got that right? Okay, awesome. So that's a simple test of your spatial intelligence, and that's awesome that so many of you got that right. Younger generations now that are using GPS, using smartphones to navigate, people's gray matter in their hippocampi is going down as a result of not being able to read a map, not being able to understand this. And a lot of people in a younger generation will get that question wrong or not understand how to make the translation. So it's a really, I think, this fascinated me, and I guess I'll tell you a bit about why this fascinated me in a second. So my question was, of these two very different areas, both of them showed to light up huge amounts of brain activity, and I wondered, well, are there commonalities between these two highly different tasks that make them light up multiple areas of our brains while doing these activities? So let me tell you why this interests me. Now, some of you that know me, either from lectures here or from other capacities, know that I'm a jazz musician. So my background in music, I have degrees in music from 3 different institutions, including a doctorate in jazz vocal performance from the University of Miami. I've been studying jazz music since I was in high school. I play multiple instruments. I started on the cello in grade school. I then went to the trumpet. I started learning piano in late high school, and I sang all through this period and continued those studies through college. As a musician, I sing, I play piano, I gig regularly. I work with other jazz musicians. As well as, of course, as Vicki mentioned, I'm a professor of music here at UW Marathon County. What you might not know about me is I'm also an adventure racer, and we'll talk a little bit about what that is in a bit. I first learned about the sport of adventure racing in the late 90s. There was a show on, I think it was Discovery Channel, and it was called Eco Challenge. And all Eco Challenge was it was a show following a race that had been going on for many years. This show was produced by a man that some of you might despise, and in some ways I do, but his name is Mark Burnett. Does anyone know the name Mark Burnett? Mark Burnett was the creator of Survivor, and he's kind of the person by which this reality TV fad has blown up. But Mark Burnett's first real reality TV show was this show called Eco Challenge, and it was really pretty cool. What it did was it followed an expedition adventure race, which is about a 10-day-long race following teams of 4 through this activity in really remote areas. And it kind of followed their personal struggles and their willingness to work together and survive and make it through this race. So you can see why that was kind of the precursor to reality television. I think it was much more real in some ways than obviously what you see on TV now. So these races happen all around, and in 2004, my I guess then girlfriend, now wife, and I did our first adventure race together in Wisconsin. It was a 12-hour race in the Chippewa Valley area for over a decade now, I guess. And we've really been competing at a national level since about 2009. We're regularly ranked among the top 10 teams in the United States. 2 years running, we're ranked as the top team in the state of Wisconsin. Thank you. It's something we're very passionate about, and it's a sport we really enjoy. It's something we can do together with our friends, and something we really love. So, before we go any further, let me give you an overview about how I'm going to compare these two very diverse activities as it relates to the brain and our ability to do these two different activities. We're going to talk about what is jazz improvisation. I'll give you some examples of what goes into improvising as a jazz musician. You see we have a keyboard set up on stage today, so I'll do a little bit from up there. I'll tell you more about what the sport of adventure racing is. We'll look at what these seemingly unrelated activities have in common, what is the draw to these activities, how you can challenge your brain more to increase your brain capacity, and where you can learn and experience more about these activities. So, let's start with what is jazz improvisation. Some of you that would have come to my lecture last year learned a little bit about the history of jazz, and we got a little bit into what it is to improvise as a jazz musician, and I'll give you another brief overview today. What it really boils down to, when I talk to my friends who are classical musicians and they say to me, how do you improvise? How can you do that? And then in my mind, I'm thinking, how can you play what you play classically on the piano? I don't have the capacity. But what I tell them is, well, have you ever composed a piece of music? And most musicians at some point in their life have composed a piece of music. It's something you learn in school, and whether or not you do it professionally, it's something most musicians have done at some point in their musical careers. What I tell them is, improvising as a jazz musician is just like being a composer. You just do it really, really fast and don't write it down. It really is the same skill set. It's the skill set of being able to apply a set of melody, notes, and rhythms over the applicable harmony at the moment. That's really what composition is, and that's what a jazz musician does when they improvise. It's really a language. When we look at these MRI studies of the brain, what we actually see is that there's huge amounts of language area that light up when you look at a musician playing their instrument. And jazz is very much a language and communicating using certain parameters within that musical idiom. It's really about creating something new on the spot every time you play or sing. So when I go to a gig and I'm going to sing on a certain tune, if I'm singing on The Autumn Leaves, I'm going to improvise something different every time I go up there. I don't have something planned out. I've certainly worked on sets of chord changes, sets of melodic structure. We'll talk a little bit more in depth about these things in a bit, but what it is, it's making something new on the spot with other musicians around you within that musical context. That's what it means to improvise as a jazz musician. So what is adventure racing? Adventure racing is an off-road, multi-sport race. It involves map and compass navigation on an unmarked course. So let me go back a second. We say multi-sport. What it means in adventure racing is typically what you're asked to do in a race is at some point in the race or multiple times in the race, you'll ride a bicycle, usually on trails through the woods. Not on a road, sometimes on a road, but usually on trails through the woods. You'll also trek or hike or run, depending on your physical capabilities, both on trails, but also off trails, meaning through the woods where there's no trail. We call that bushwhacking. Going through brush, going through, finding the fastest way through the woods. And then lastly, there's also usually a paddling element, meaning some type of canoeing or kayaking. There can also be other things involved, different obstacles, but those are the main three elements of an adventure race. Riding a bicycle, traveling via your feet, and traveling in some type of a paddle-powered boat. People ask me, well, so it's kind of like an off-road triathlon. And I say, well, it's somewhat similar to the same disciplines, because sometimes in an off-road triathlon you paddle. But the main difference is that in adventure racing, it's not a marked course. So if you've ever done like a 5K or any type of a running race or any type of a race, usually there's flags and arrows and people saying, go that way. There's not that in an adventure race. There's someone at the start line that gives you a map and a set of instructions, and they say, see you later. And you travel through the woods, and you have this map, and you have a compass. GPS is not allowed. You get disqualified from the race if you have a GPS with you. So you have to use your compass and your ability to read a map to find your way through the woods. So typically when we get to a race, like I said, we're given a map, and depending on the length of the race, the map can be anywhere from just like a single page printed map, small map, to when we do larger, longer races, the maps are about 3 feet by 3 feet, and we get about 6 of them. So really detailed maps and a lot of maps. And on those maps are marked checkpoints, just little circles on the map that say checkpoint 4, checkpoint 50, checkpoint 68. And depending on the length of the race, there are different checkpoints. And then the instructions will tell you for checkpoints, it's always different, but maybe for checkpoints 1 through 8, travel via your bicycle to these points in any order. Then when you get to checkpoint 9, you're going to drop your bike and you're going to run to the next 10. And that changes for every race. You don't know what's going to happen until you get there and they say go. Sometimes maybe an hour before they give you the instructions so you have a chance to read them through and ask any questions. The races can last anywhere from a shorter race, which might be 2 or 3 hours in duration, where maybe you're asked to trek 3 miles and bike 10 miles and paddle 3 miles, to much longer races. We've done races as long as 72 hours, where we traveled across the state of Florida. A lot of times we do races that are about 24 hours long, and we'll go straight through the night from morning to morning, racing as a team together to get through this race. So it's really kind of an interesting, unique sport. As I mentioned, it's a team sport. Typically, teams are 2 to 4 members, and what's considered the elite division. When we compete on a national level, we need to compete as an elite division team, and that's a team of 3 or 4 people, and it's always a co-ed team. There's always guys and girls on the team together. As I mentioned, so there's elements of navigation, route choice, and I put those first on purpose because oftentimes navigation and route choice are much more important than speed. You can be the fastest guy out there, but if you're going in the wrong direction, you're not going to win the race, right? So you have to be able to use a map really well. Certainly speed is a factor. Endurance is a big factor, as well as nutrition, especially on longer races. That's a big thing, being able to keep hydrated and keep fueled, as well as your ability to work on a team. So it's kind of a unique niche sport, I suppose. And we'll talk about some more elements of this as we go along. So, what are the commonalities? As I looked at this, thinking about, well, what makes both of these areas light up so many, or both of these activities light up so many areas of our brains, I found 4 commonalities, categories of commonalities. The first is both require large amounts of prerequisite knowledge and ability. There's a lot that goes into what you have to have learned before you can be really successful at these activities. The second is both contain a lot of elements of multitasking. There's obviously, when you think about it, if the brain is doing many different things, it's because it's multitasking. It's doing many things at once. Both these activities really largely involve multitasking. They both involve improvisation, flexibility, and a willingness to make mistakes. And we'll talk more about all these things. And then lastly, they both involve teamwork. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through these 4 categories one by one and compare what it is when you improvise as a jazz musician compared to adventure racing, and how these diverse activities compare to each other. So the prerequisite knowledge to be a jazz musician. Now, certainly there are people in high school and even junior high that play jazz music, but what I'm talking about here is someone that can really, what we would call competently improvise as a jazz musician. So we're really looking at maybe someone that's on a professional or a very high level as a jazz musician. The first prerequisite, and it certainly isn't something you do while you improvise, but any jazz musician has a working understanding of music notation. They can read music. That's a complicated task in and of itself, learning the system of notes, values, rhythms, pitch, and how that applies to your respective instrument. So there's an understanding of music notation, ability to play music, that's first and foremost, of course, before you start improvising. You need to have an understanding of chord progression and harmony. And I'm going to jump up to the keyboard for a sec. So, contrary to some popular belief, when a jazz musician improvises, they don't just play anything. You can't just go up, play any notes you want, and it's going to work, right? Free jazz music, and that was maybe more geared toward that self-expression, but in most contexts of jazz improvisation, there's a system that you must follow. So, the system starts off with, you have to understand harmony and how chords work. So, did you ever learn when you were in school solfege? Is that something that's familiar to you? Do you know solfege? Solfege is what we like do re mi fa sol la ti do. You know that, right? So what I just sang was called a major scale. Major scale goes up and down the major solfege scale. A major scale works on a major chord. It does not work on a minor chord. It does not work on a dominant chord. It doesn't work on a half diminished chord, an altered dominant seventh chord with a flat 9. You have to be able to play scales and notes that fit the chord of the moment. Meaning if I play this chord, that works, right? But if I play this chord, let me do one that really doesn't work. It doesn't fit as well. There's some notes in there that don't work. So if I play like a dominant chord, what we call a 5 chord, I'll sing a different scale. I'll sing do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, te. Hear that different note? Te, do, te, la, sol, fa, mi, re, do. And I understand, depending on what chord is happening at the moment, that I'm going to sing something differently so it works. For example, if I sang that T in that scale, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti. Here that doesn't quite work. It's a really sharp clash, and it doesn't fit as well as te, that fits in the chord, da-da. So I've got to understand what notes fit in every chord of the moments and what the chord progression of the song is. The chord progression of the song, I think the next slide refers to this, refers to musical song form. In like pop music, musical song form is like talking about something in terms of like verse and chorus and maybe bridge and refrain. In jazz music, we usually refer to song form in terms of letters, like A, B, A, C is a song form. That also applies to classical music, or A, A, B, A. And that just refers to what sections of the tune come in what order, and then it's classifying, okay, maybe this 8 bars, this is the chord progression, we're going to call that the A section of the tune, versus the next section has different chords, different melody, that's the B section of the tune, right? So I'll give you an example of this. I'm going to play on the piano a chord progression that I'm sure all of you know, because it's a song everyone in this room knows, I think, pretty sure. But instead of singing the melody of the song, I'm going to improvise over it. And I want you to kind of listen to the chords and see if you can figure out what the melody is. Don't say it out loud, because I want to give everyone a chance to get it. I'll improvise the first time, completely removed of the melody. See if you figure it out. If you can't, I'll start adding the melody in. Okay, so here's the chord progression, and I'll improvise over that. Ba 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 da ba ba be da boo. Ba 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 be ba ba boo be dee boo be blee dee. Ba be da ba ba be blee da ba 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 da be blee da ba 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 be ba ba be be da. Anyone have it? Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Couple hands went up. That's awesome. So what I'll do now is I'm going to kind of hint at the melody a little more. See if you can figure out what the song is. Ba 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 beep 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 da ba 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 beep 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 da ba 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 beep ba 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 day to you. Okay. So the Happy Birthday has a song form. It has a certain set of chords. It starts on the 1 chord, and after a few bars, it goes to the 5 chord, and later it goes to 1 and a 1 over the 3 and a 4 chord. I played a sharp 4 diminished chord just for a little jazz harmony in there. It has a chord progression, and jazz musicians know chord progressions to hundreds of songs. And when they improvise, they think about, well, what's coming next? What's the next chord? How can I apply what I'm playing or singing harmonically to the chord of the moment, to the song structure or musical song form of the moment? Does that make sense? Okay, cool. In addition to that, when you improvise, you not only need to think about harmony, you need to think about the rhythmic style in which you're playing. Some examples of rhythmic styles could include swing, bossa nova, ballad, samba, cha-cha. There's lots of different rhythmic styles. And to give you an example of that, I think this is a song I think I sang this 2 years ago when all of a sudden our PowerPoint went out. I just thought of that, as Vicki mentioned that to me earlier today. So, Fly Me to the Moon, the popular Frank Sinatra song, can be done in many different rhythmic styles, and depending on the rhythmic style that it's being done in, meaning that the piano, bass, and drums are playing, the soloist will also accommodate the rhythms that they sing or play to that style, meaning are the eighth notes going to be swung, da, 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 versus straight eighth notes, da, 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 da. So here's just 2 or 3 examples of Fly Me to the Moon. Here it would be in maybe what's considered the most common way in a swing tune. Fly me to the moon and let me play among the stars. Let me see what spring is like on Jupiter and Mars. In other words, hold my hand. And I'm swinging the rhythms in that. If I do the exact same thing, but in a bossa nova, the rhythms will change. Fly me to the moon and let me play among the stars. Let me see what spring is like on Jupiter and Mars. In other words, hold my hand. Do you feel the difference? Hear the difference in those styles? So I have to think about it as an improviser. What am I doing differently with my rhythm to match up with what the drummer's playing? Because certainly if I sing, and I can't do it because I'm not used to it, if I sing a swing style and play a bossa nova, it's not going to work because it's not going to fit with the drummer, with the bass player, with the pianist. So there's a lot of multitasking and things you need to think about. I guess even before we get to that, there's a lot of just prerequisite knowledge of, well, what are these rhythmic styles? How do I fit into that? How do I match song form, harmony, and play musically as I'm doing that? So, I don't know where to point this. Okay. Certainly, there's some motor and physical skills you need to have to get yourself through a race, which can just include being able to ride a bicycle, which is certainly a skill in and of itself, being able to trek whatever distance the race is, as well as being able to paddle in a boat. Much more importantly, the prerequisite knowledge for being successful in an adventure race is your ability to map read. It includes knowledge of USGS and orienteering map symbols. USGS maps are most commonly used in adventure race. USGS refers to United States Geological Survey maps. They're usually maps that are in a scale of 1 to 24,000. It's a fairly detailed scale map, and I'll show you an example of it in a minute. Orienteering maps are even more detailed. When an orienteering map is made, someone combines data from USGS and an aerial map, meaning a photograph from a satellite or a plane, and then actually has someone go out into the field and map things by hand. To make an orienteering map of a 2 square kilometer area usually takes one individual 6 months of daily work. It's a lot of time. But what's really cool is even around here, down especially in the Madison area, there's a lot of orienteering maps for the Badger Orienteering Club. Places like Devil's Lake, places in the Kettle Moraine, as well as throughout Madison. If you go over to the Twin Cities, they have an orienteering club with lots of these maps, which is so cool because the investment of time it takes to make one is incredible. But it's really fun to use a map like that to race on because it's so detailed. Everything from a park bench to a fallen tree is on there. So it's really kind of fun for someone who, like me, who likes maps because you get all the detail right there and you know it's right. So it's not, let me see how I say this. It's not enough to just be able to understand what the symbols in the map mean. It's that ability to translate, just like you all did earlier, translating that spatial intelligence from being able to see something on paper to make a 3D image of that. And the better you are at that, the more successful you're going to be at reading a map. So here's an example of a blow-up of a USGS map. So there's some differences on them. Can you find where we are? Can you find what building we're in? The building we are in is on that map. I'll give you a second here. And I'll tell you one thing that's tricky about this. Here we are here. You see the pointer there? That's the building we're in. I mentioned this map was made in 1983. What's missing right here? This CCE, the Center for Civic Engagement across the street, is not on the map, right? So if you're looking for two buildings next to each other, you would have missed that. But sure enough, there we are, right on, there's Stewart Avenue, here's Marathon Park. So that's square one, finding where you are. When you get the map at the start of a race, you got to find yourself on the map. Don't just go off and start running with everyone else and realize you don't know where you are. Now, the next thing is being able to translate that into route choice. So if you were driving your car, and I said, you know where there's that, on 17th Avenue, there's that tank? Do you know where, where the tank is? Well, is that in front, what building is that in front of? The Armory. Okay, so there's a tank in front of the Armory down here on 17th. If you were driving your car, how would you get there? You'd probably take Stewart Avenue over, you'd take a left, you come down, and it would be on your left. You probably all know how to get to that point. You know, after you cross the railroad tracks, the buses are on your right, that area. But if I asked you to get there the fastest way via a bicycle, would you take a different route? I would. Yeah. I would probably take the back roads. I don't want to get in that busy intersection there on Stewart Avenue and 17th. There's too much traffic. So what I would do, I would take the back roads down here. I'd come over. I'd go past the the school district building there, and I'd come down this road here. That's how I'd get there in a bicycle, because the roads are very fast moving. It's paved. If I asked you to get there by a foot, would you take that route? No. Where would you go through? Yeah, you go through Marathon Park. You find your fastest way through Marathon Park. Now, if I was just casually doing this because I wanted to go for a walk, I'd probably take the trails through Marathon Park, walk on those trails. If I was in a race, I would almost do a straight shot through because it's all flat. Nothing's going to be in my way. I wouldn't even take the trails. I would just go fastest way. I'd kind of have an idea of my bearing, and I'd run through Marathon Park. So it depends what mode of transportation you're using, what route you're going to take. Now, the other thing to think about is there aren't many obstacles here in the way. But let's say you're on the south side of Rib Mountain and you want to get to the north side of Rib Mountain. Is the fastest way to go take a straight line? You're going to want to go around that thing, right? So you've got to look at the contour on the map. There's a lot of things you need to think about to find your fastest route. And not only that, then other things like vegetation come into play. Sometimes the fastest way might look really good, but if it's full of briar patches, you don't want to go through that, right? Well, you might depending, but that's a route choice, right? Here's what an orienteering map looks like. It's very different. This is a real close scale. This is a 1 to 10,000 scale map. This is of a park over near the Twin Cities. This is what I'd actually get in a race, at an orienteering race. An orienteering race is just a race where you're given a map, and it's usually about maybe anywhere from 2 kilometers to 5 kilometers of going on foot, trying to find all these points. So all these pink circles you see with a letter next to them, in the woods, and I should have explained this earlier, there's a 3-dimensional flag that's usually orange and white. It's about this big, 1 foot by 1 foot, 3-dimensional flag, and from it is hanging a unique hole punch. And what you do in these races is you go there, you have a passport with you that you take with you, and you, to prove you were there, you punch the unique hole punch on your passport to say, I was here. And at the end of the race, you show it to them to prove that you got to all the points. That's how this works. So in an orienteering race, these would all be flags in the woods. There's so much detail in here. You see how the different colors between like a brown and a white and different shades of green, those are all different types of vegetation. And it's a internationally unified system to do this. So you can go do a orienteering map in Sweden, and it's going to be the same type of map. I'll be able to read all the same symbols, all the same vegetation, all the same topography. So there's a lot of fun things to think about when you're doing that. Is it going to be fast to take the trail? If I go through the woods, how thick is that? That really dark green in some places is really thick woods that you probably don't want to go through because it's going to be much slower than going around on a lighter green or a white or a brown color. So that's what an orienteering map looks like, and many times you'll get that type of map. I'm always happy when we get those in Adventure Race because as someone who navigates like myself, I enjoy having a really good map to read. Here's another example of, this is a map I scanned in from a race we did down in West Virginia. It was a 24-hour race, and this is just one section of it. I don't know if you can see this, but here it says CP 8 through 22. So what happened was we biked into this point about 14 hours into the race. It was the middle of the night. And the instruction said, drop your bikes and find points 18 through 22 via foot. And this was the map we had. The orange highlighting is what we did prior to the race, as well as writing in the clues. So there's clues here like hillside, reentrant, hilltop, ruins, cave, natural bridge. There's all kinds of fun things to find out there. But then we had to pick our route. So what we did was we went kind of, if you follow my, my pointer here, we kind of went down here, followed the power line down to this hilltop, took the hilltop over, just took a straight shot to this red trail to find these ruins down the hillside. And we kind of just made a loop of this using all the topography on the map to find our way. Now, this is, it's a 1 to 24,000 scale, so that probably took about 4 or 5 hours of pretty fast trekking and running to do that. And it's really hard at night. Because, you're trying to read all this topography, but you can't see more than like 20. You have a headlamp on, but you can't see that far in front of you to figure that out. So you really have to keep track of things. And I'll tell you more about how we do that later. But there's another example of maybe a much harder map. That would be a real advanced map in a race to be able to successfully navigate. So how do we multitask in these two activities? In jazz improvisation, you're asked to both play or sing and listen at the same time. This is a lot harder than you'd think. And seriously, this is something we work with students on quite a bit, is how do you get past just listening to what you're doing and focusing on all that's going into your own playing, but then also seeing how everyone else fits into what you're doing and making sure that, all of a sudden, if I got a bar off, that I'm not just going to keep going and playing the wrong notes and scales over the chords the rhythm section is playing because they're right or whatever that may be. So there's a lot of multitasking involved in that. You've got to keep track, as I said, of the chords, the harmony, the song form as you're playing, right? As well as responding in real time to other musicians. Having that conversation. As I mentioned, one thing they looked at in those MRI scans was trading fours, being musical back and forth, and not just playing, I'm going to play this because this is what I have in mind, but, person A sang, ba 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 ba, and person B responded, ba 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 ba. Person A sang, be-da be-da, and person B responded, ba-da be-da. So it's that musical conversation with each other, responding in the moment to one another. And you have to be able to listen, of course, to do that, to be able to respond effectively and musically. How we multitask in adventure racing. First of all, there's all those skills we talked about that goes into reading a map. Then there's also all those skills that go into reading a map while moving. This is also harder than you'd think. So when I'm the navigator on our team. So what I do is when I'm on a bike, I actually have a clip that goes on my bike handlebars that has basically a flat surface on top that spins around, and I clip my map onto that. So it's on a flat surface as I'm riding, and I can look down at it. I think because I'm on a bike and there's the inherent risk of falling over as you're riding a bike, I'm pretty careful on that. I don't look at it on really hard terrain. For some reason, when I'm running, I seem to feel like, I'll be fine, and I fall a lot. I was doing a race down in the Kettle Moraine area a couple months ago when it was fall and there was a lot of leaves on the ground, and I think over the 2 hours of running, I probably just fell into the leaves. I felt like a little kid running through the woods and just falling all over the place. Because there's a lot involved with looking at the map, looking at your feet, and beyond that, you also need to look for checkpoints as you're doing this. You need to look for those orange flags. So you're looking around, you're trying to visualize the terrain, use your spatial intelligence, all while at the same time you're looking at a map and interpreting that and making that into a 3D image for yourself to find your way through. As you're doing an adventure race, then you also need to think about some other elements. You need to think about, are you hydrating correctly? Are you taking enough food in? Is your body working properly so you can get through this physical activity as well as this mental activity? And I tell you what, once your body physically starts to shut down, so does your brain, right? So you got to take care of yourself to make sure you can get through one of these things. You also need to manage your feet, make sure you don't get blisters, make sure your clothing is appropriate, you're not sweating too much if it's wintertime, because once you stop, you're going to get really cold, as well as managing your gear, taking care of your bicycle, all the things that go along with that. And then lastly, you need to keep track of your race strategies. Most times when I say this is an 8-hour race or a 12-hour race that we do, that means that's the cutoff for the race, and you have to be back by that point or you're disqualified. And certainly there are different rules, but usually how it works is whoever gets the most checkpoints wins, and then if it's a tie for checkpoints, the fastest person to get those checkpoints wins. So you need to kind of keep track of your strategy. If I skip this point, does that mean I can get 3 extra over here? So there's all that to think about as well in terms of the strategy that goes into that, all while reading a map, looking for checkpoints, managing your nutrition, managing your body and your gear. There's a lot of multitasking involved, just as there was in jazz music. And then lastly, of course, you need to take care of your teammates. You're on a team. You need to look for people you need to make sure and monitor and see, is someone struggling? Can I help out? What can I do? Can I remind someone to eat some food or drink some water? In both these activities, there are elements of improvisation, of course, flexibility, and a willingness to make mistakes. So in jazz improvisation, you need to use your ears to make changes and anticipate what's coming next. You need to kind of listen to the other players. Know that mistakes happen, and you need to be able to adjust, whether that be in a live performance and something goes wrong, or whether that be, I played a wrong note, how do I get back on track? Or if I lost track of the chord changes in Happy Birthday, how do I listen for that 4 chord that's really unique and then get back on from there? What can I do to readjust as I'm playing through a song? And then lastly, you can't be self-critical. One thing that the MRI brain study looked at of the jazz musician is as these self-expression areas were lighting up and becoming incredibly active, the self-monitoring areas of the brain were shutting off, which I think is a really interesting thing. What that means is that the players who are really good jazz musicians aren't doing things like being critical or self-assessing themselves as they're playing. They're trying to be musical and expressive in the moment without saying, was that good? Do I sound all right? Was that a good note? I played that wrong. You have to be able to move on. Otherwise, your brain can't handle all that. So your brain actually teaches itself to shut those self-critical areas off when you're playing jazz music. In adventure racing, I think the most important thing of being successful is if you're lost, you need to problem solve to be able to find yourself. And you're going to get lost. I think, especially starting out, there were so many times where we'd be out in the middle of the woods and you just have to figure it out because you're out in the middle of the woods and no one is saying, go this way. You have to be able to know where you're going. You can take some risks sometimes and say, okay, I'm going to try to go through this section. I see there's a water crossing, but maybe it'll be shallow. And this happened to us once in Florida. It was a really big shortcut if it was going to work. And we got to this big stream crossing, and we were about to get in, and we saw 4 alligators. And we thought, oh, shoot. We had just thought we'd cut off all this time, and we had to go all the way 2 miles down to the bridge and over because we weren't about to jump in the water with the alligators. So, we thought it was going to be a shortcut, and we thought, okay, we can swim. It was only 100 meters across, but we weren't swimming with the alligators. So sometimes it sets you back, right? The terrain isn't always going to match what's on the map. I showed you that the CCE was missing on that map, right? Because things change. We once were doing national championships in Texas, and thought we'd found a kind of strategic route choice, and we're going through on this trail, and all of a sudden there's a subdivision. And I look at the map and think, and the map was 10 years old. And since that time, they'd built a brand new big subdivision right in the middle of our route, and we had to go all the way around it. So, you have to kind of be able to adjust and change plans, be flexible as you're doing this. There are also non-navigational choices or adjustments you need to make based on a lot of factors. If your teammate is dehydrated, you need to get them to water, especially if you've run out of water. If your bike breaks and the derailleur breaks, and we had a derailleur break once in a big state championship race for our teammate, we had to sit down for about 10 minutes and re-gear the bike into what we call a single speed. Meaning take off the derailleur that had broken because it wasn't shifting anyways, put it in a middle range gear where the person could just ride in one gear for the rest of the race. Wasn't ideal, but we had to make that adjustment and be flexible to be able to make that work and still finish the race and do well. And lastly, you just need to stay positive. I think we've done about 80 races over the last 10 years, and we've won about 30 races in the last 10 years. So we've got a pretty good track record. I think of all those races, there's been one race that I would call a perfect race. Everything went as I thought it would. All the routes that I picked were the routes that were the best route. I didn't get lost. Every other one of those races, something went wrong, and I think a really important ability to have is the ability to stay positive with your teammates and with your racing to be able to get through it and know that, okay, well, that didn't work. Let's figure out how we're going to fix this, and let's figure out how we get back on track. I think that's a really important element of a successful team. And lastly, the teamwork involved in these two activities. So certainly in jazz, you're working towards a collective goal of making something beautiful or meaningful and working together towards this. Everyone has a role in making jazz music. If I'm the bass player, my role is to play the roots of the chords. And play some kind of, if this is a swing walking bass line, that we'd call like a 4/4 walking bass line. Does that sound familiar? Harmony. Same with the guitar player. You'd play the harmony of the moment. I'm playing something that gives the chordal structure, not just the root of the chord the bass player is playing, but the chords that happen. Also doing that in rhythm to comp. The drummer has a role. The drummer has to provide the rhythm. So if it's swung, this provides what you'd call the rhythm section accompaniment to someone improvising, and then the person improvises over that based on the chord structure. So if the bass line is happening, dum, 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 ba-dum, dum, 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 dum. The pianist has to listen to the bass player to line up what they're doing with their chords rhythmically. The drummer needs to listen to make sure their beats are matching up. So everyone has their different role as it applies to working towards making some kind of improvisatory musical art. So how can you complement each other, like call and response or trading earlier? That's a matter of complementing each other. If a soloist is leaving a lot of space in what they do, meaning the solo may just be ba-doo-da, ba-ba-doo, beep-beep. There's a lot of space in there. So if I should have stayed up there, but I'll just try to do this from here. In that space, maybe the pianist plays a lick. The singer sings ba-doo-da, beep, beep, bum, 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 bee, ba-doo-da, bum, bum, bee-da. So you kind of respond to each other and help each other out. Whereas the soloist, if they're playing a lot of notes, the pianist can be a little more sparse and play less. You also might kind of add on to someone's idea. Do-ba-doo, beep-boo, ba-ba-da, beep-ba-ba. You can kind of musically have that conversation even within the rhythm section. So everyone has that role. Everyone tries to complement each other in some kind of a teamwork fashion. So there's certainly huge elements of teamwork in adventure racing as well. You have to stay together as a team. So most times when you get the rules at the beginning of the race, it'll say you must stay within, it's usually 100 feet or 100 meters of your teammates at all times throughout the race. So it's not like a tag team trading off. It's everyone's got to stick together the entire race and make it through it. Everyone in the adventure racing team also has a role. So just like in jazz improvisation, you have your role to fit into that greater task. On my team, I'm the navigator. So my main responsibility is to be able to read that map and successfully get through the course. In jazz improvisation, In jazz improvisation, maybe that navigating role, which is the important role, might apply to the person that's improvising, right? But there's so many other key important roles. My wife is our medical expert on the team, so if something goes wrong, she's a medical professional. She can help out. But maybe even more importantly, what she uses more often is she's our pace counter. So if I'm reading the map and I say, we need to go 400 meters, can you let me know when we've gone 400 meters on foot? She'll do that. She's usually within 5 meters. So she can have that accuracy of being able to pace count. Then the third person in our team is usually what we call our workhorse. And our workhorse is the person who carries all the heavy weight in their backpack. So, we have to carry a lot of gear with you. So they carry all that heavy weight, and they're in the front of the bike line, pacing or leading the bike line through the wind, so we can kind of draft, you call that, behind them. So there's different roles, and you take on these different roles, and sometimes those change. So if our workhorse gets tired, we got to trade off. You're only going to be as fast as your slowest teammate, right? You have to communicate to let each other know how you're doing, how you can help out your team, whether you can take someone's backpack for them, whether you can give someone an energy bar because they've run out. You've got to be able to communicate and work together. I know we're running a little, Vicky's giving me a look, so I'm going to wrap up real quick. So, I think there's, why I was drawn to both at least, is because there's really an inherent challenge, I think, to both activities. They're both limitless in the way that there's a never-ending process of learning. Never in my life, I don't think ever in any professional jazz musician's life will they say, I've learned everything there is to learn about playing jazz music. I'm not going to practice anymore because I've got it down. It's always, there's always wanting to get better, wanting to be able to play more freely, wanting to be able to express yourself more readily. And the same in adventure racing. You can always get better at reading a map, and it's really good for your mind to continue to work on that process. And then also, both of these things are very much based around the idea of engaging with others towards a collective goal. Occasionally, I'll do gigs where I play piano and sing, and it's just me, and I get really bored. Because in jazz improvisation, it's having that musical conversation. So I'd much rather have a saxophonist with me, that we can bounce ideas off each other. Otherwise, it's just like sitting in a room and talking to yourself while other people eat their dinner, right? So you want to be able to communicate with someone, so you're having that interaction. And similarly in adventure racing, it's getting through something together and surmounting this goal that I think has a great sense of achievement with it as this collective unit, as this team. So how can you challenge your brain more? One of the best ways that's been proven to increase your intelligence and challenge yourself, whether it be at a very young age or any age, is to learn a new musical instrument or pick up an instrument you haven't played in a while. If you've never done that, I'd really challenge you to do that. Take a lesson, learn something. The more you stick at it, the better it gets. It actually shows 36 months is the point where you can get the most return. If you spend 3 years learning an instrument, your capacity and your brain capacity will hugely, hugely increase. Turn off your GPS and use a map. This is, as I mentioned at the beginning of the lecture, this is what's become detrimental to a younger generation that doesn't use maps. Is they're really limiting how much they can, what was it, the hippocampal gray matter in the brain? They're limiting how much space there is for this capacity to be able to read maps. Go to an orienteering race, by the way. Go down to Badger Orienteering Club. There's age divisions all the way up to, the top age division is 70 plus. So if you're younger than 70, you can get in the 60 to 70 division. Go over to Badger Orienteering Club or Minnesota Orienteering Club, and most of the time, and I'll tell you what, when I first started racing out in California, I went to my first orienteering race, and I was so fast, and every checkpoint, there'd be this gentleman probably in his 70s walking with a map, and every checkpoint, I'd come in huffing and puffing, and I'm a fast runner, and there he would be a couple seconds before me. He was really good at reading the map and just walking from point to the point where I was exerting myself horribly, and he was not sweating it at all. So try one of these orienteering races. Try an orienteering map. Some other ideas. Memorize something. Memorize a poem or a song lyric. Learn a foreign language or a new computer program. Put down your calculator and do math by hand. Play chess or solve mind puzzles has been proven to be great for your brain. Some other just ideas. Learn new words daily. Use your non-dominant hand for activities. Learn a new movement, whether it be a dance or some type of movement. Memorize people's phone numbers as opposed to looking them up. Build something. Seek out other points of view and be inquisitive. These are all things that can really increase your brain capacity, and they're all things that require multitasking, just as the two activities I went through today do. And lastly, if you'd like to experience jazz music or adventure racing firsthand, here are our jazz concert dates for the semester. You can always find these dates on our website, uwmc.uwc.edu, and then there's a link for arts, and there's a link for music under arts, or you can just type in /arts/music, learn all about our music department here. We have a vocal jazz festival concert, April 11th in the CCE. There's a small admission for that concert. We're bringing in professional guest artist group Groove for Thought from Seattle. They're fantastic, a cappella and with rhythm section vocal jazz ensemble. And our spring concert, where you hear the instrumental jazz ensemble from school, as well as our 2 vocal jazz ensembles, and is free, is Thursday, May 7th, 7 p.m. in the CCE. As well as that, if you want to hear jazz music over the summer, there's the Sid Kyler Jazz Fest. I'm not sure how many of you are aware of this. It's becoming an awesome, awesome jazz fest to have in our community. 2 days of jazz music, July 24th and 25th is outside and inside. There's 2 venues at Buchholz. Marilyn McPartland is our featured guest jazz musician this year, and we have a great lineup planned. And lastly, not many people know about this yet. My wife and I are putting on our first adventure race this spring. So on May 23rd, we're putting on, I didn't put the date on there, May 23rd. You go to the website for the name of the race, Rib Mountain Adventure Challenge. We're putting on a 3-hour and 8-hour race the same day. You're welcome to join us. We're looking for volunteers. If you'd like to volunteer, go to that website, ribmountainadventurechallenge.com, and fill out the volunteer form. We're looking for people to help out in many different capacities, or people to race, being an adventure race. So I hope this was interesting to you. It certainly was interesting to me to look into these things a little further. Thanks for having me here this morning. It's great to join you.